A psychotic strangler was on the loose in the Boston area. 13 women murdered in 18 months, ages 19 to 85. Most were white, one was black. Some were also beaten, others were also stabbed. The only thing they had in common was the fact that they were all single. And for months, police refused to believe they were all victims of a single killer, a madman dubbed the Boston Strangler. Then, a confession came from a convicted predator already behind bars, Albert DeSalvo. But to this day, some experts believe there was more than one killer responsible, and no one has ever been charged for the heinous killing spree. Let's go back to 1962 and take another look at this infamous case. Hi, I'm Chris, and you're watching True Crime Recaps. Mary Sullivan was the last to die. The 19-year-old's high school yearbook described her as a happy-go-lucky girl with a cheery outlook toward life, dancing, parties, and church activities. And she was on the cusp of a whole new beginning. In fact, she'd just taken the plunge and moved to Boston from Cape Cod. But her new beginning was over almost as soon as it started. 2 days after she got to the big city, she was savagely violated in her apartment and strangled to death with 2 silk scarves and her nylon stocking. Her roommates found her half naked on her bed on January 4th, 1964. A greeting card reading "Happy New Year" was propped against her foot. Someone snuffed the light out of this girl's eyes, but who? The question was sending the entire city into a panic. Women were barricading themselves in their homes. Sales for locks went through the roof. The police commissioner wanted residents to check ID before opening their doors. Janitors were asked to keep an eye on people going in and out of their buildings. Even priests were telling women to keep their doors locked. Boston was terrified. And the most frightening thing was that no one knew who exactly they should be afraid of. They called him the Phantom Strangler since he always seemed to be able to get in and out of locked apartments without a trace. Mary was his 13th victim, and it all started in the summer of 1962. Anna Slessers was a 55-year-old divorced woman living alone in a 3-room apartment in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. On June 14th, her neighbors saw her come home alone at her usual time, around 5:30 or 6, and she worked as a seamstress for a local decorating company. She was planning on attending a memorial for victims of the Russian invasion of Latvia with her son that night, but when he knocked on her door around 7, there was no answer. He figured she must have run to the store for something, so he decided to wait for her downstairs in the lobby. And almost an hour passed with no sign of Anna. By now, they were running very late to the memorial, which wasn't at all like his mother. He was starting to worry that she might have hurt herself in the apartment. When there was still no answer to his knock, he let himself in. And what he found behind that closed door was much worse than any nightmare he could have imagined. The apartment was ransacked, and his mother lay dead on the kitchen floor, wearing only her bathrobe. Its belt was tight around her neck, tied in a big loopy bow. And she'd been home for less than 2 hours when someone beat and strangled her to death. But who? And why? She'd only been living in that apartment for 14 days before she was attacked. Is it a coincidence that she was new to the neighborhood, just like Mary Sullivan? The strangler struck again only a couple of weeks later. This time, it was 85-year-old Mary Mullen. She was found on her sofa. The official cause of death was a heart attack. Someone had literally scared her to death. But it would be a long time before the world knew who that someone was. A couple of days later, on June 30th, 68-year-old Nina Nichols was found on her bedroom floor. Her pink bathrobe was ripped open and her undergarments were askew. And 2 nylon stockings were tied in a bow around her neck. And while police were investigating what they thought was a robbery gone wrong, another woman was found dead across town. Helen Blake was face down on her bed when her housekeeper found her. 2 stockings were tied in a bow around her neck. Her bra was wrapped around them. Now, over the next year and a half, 8 more women would be found the same way. Jane Buckley Sullivan, 67. Patricia Bullock Bissett, 22. Marie Corbin, 58. 22-year-old Joanne Graff, and 20-year-old Sophie Clark. Now, her apartment was only a few hundred yards away from Anna Slessor's place, and they'd all been violated, beaten, and strangled. 2 other victims, 69-year-old Marianne Brown and 26-year-old Beverly Sammons, were also stabbed. All in all, 13 women were brutally slain, and no one knew how to stop him from doing it again and again and again. Then, on October 27, 1964, a strange man pretending to be a detective talked himself into a woman's apartment. And when the door shut behind him, he tied her to the bed, assaulted her, and left. But, bizarrely, as he walked out, he told her he was very, very sorry. But he wasn't half as sorry as he was about to be. She had gotten a good look at her attacker and did a bang-up job describing his face for the public. When she was finished, they had a pretty good idea who they were looking for. A career rapist and burglar named Albert DeSalvo. Albert was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts on September 3, 1931. His childhood was brutal thanks to his father, a man who ruled his family with his fists and sadistic impulses. He spent his life in and out of trouble, and in between prison stints for assaults and robberies, he managed to be drafted into the military, get married, and have 2 kids. Now, he didn't have much in the way of what you would call book learning, but he did have a cruel cleverness to him and a way of talking himself up, so if you didn't know any better, you might just believe the tall tales he was spinning. Posing as a detective was just one of the ways he managed to talk himself into locked apartments. His favorite con was pretending to be a modeling scout. With a notebook and measuring tape in hand, he would knock on a woman's door and tell her that he spotted her on the street and thought she was absolutely lovely. And if she would only allow him to take a few minutes to take her measurements, someone from his agency would be in touch. Once he was inside, he would take her measurements all right and make sure to aggressively fondle her as he did it. That's how he got his nickname, the Measuring Man. But his modeling scout days came to an end when he was arrested in March of 1960. He spent almost a year in prison thinking of the things he would do when he got out. His next crime spree earned him yet another nickname, the Green Man, because he always wore green work clothes when he tied up and sexually assaulted his victims. 2 months after he was released from yet another prison stay in 1962, Anna Slessor's was killed. At first, no one connected Albert DeSalvo to the Strangler's victims, and they might never have done so if he hadn't confessed. After his arrest in the fall of 1964, he was sent to the Center for the Treatment of Sexually Dangerous Persons at Bridgewater, where he became depressed and suicidal. Then, in the spring of 1965, he allegedly told another inmate, George Nasser, about what he'd been up to over the last couple of years. Since the gruesome killing spree was so high profile, George immediately told his lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, about what DeSalvo had said. And Bailey took his case. And not everyone was so quick to believe his confession. And like I said, he was known for spinning tall tales, and confessing to such a high-profile crime could bring in big bucks with a book, a movie, and more. And the law that blocked killers from making money off their crimes wouldn't come along for another 12 years. But in any case, whether his motivations were morals or money, he swore he was the one behind all 13 murders. Before he spoke up, the police had only linked 11 of the women to the Boston Strangler. It was DeSalvo who told them there were actually 13, and he was pretty proud of his ability to pull them off without leaving a clue. He didn't get every detail of the murders right, and at least one he got totally wrong, but he knew things about the crimes that hadn't made it into the papers. Things like the fact that the killer had tied the ligatures and bows around his victims' necks. But other than his confession, they didn't have any physical evidence connecting him to the murders. The other crimes were a different story. As I said, he had a long history with the Massachusetts prison system, and in 1967, he was sentenced to life for the Green Man crime spree. He wasn't charged with the strangulations, but they let it be known that he'd confessed, and since he was in prison anyway, no one put up much of a fuss about it. While he was inside, he seemed to relish in his notoriety. He even made and sold jewelry, specifically chokers. He got a kick out of that. 6 years later, he was stabbed to death in the prison infirmary. But here's where it gets interesting. 2 weeks before he was murdered, he wrote a letter to a pen pal claiming he was about to drop a big bombshell and, quote, tell the truth to clear his name of the murders. Apparently, he never got his big payday, and he was sick of lawmakers and even his own lawyer cashing in on his notoriety. But he never got the chance to reveal his secret, if he ever had one. And no one was ever charged with the Boston Strangler's murders. Then, 49 years after Mary Sullivan was murdered, technology did what no one else had been able to do. Connect Albert DeSalvo to at least one of the murders. DNA from semen found in her apartment was a match to DeSalvo, but to this day, no evidence exists to say for sure if DeSalvo killed all 13 women. So, what do you think? Was DeSalvo really the Boston Strangler? Thanks for watching, but don't go away. There's more recaps coming up right now. And if you like getting all the crime in half the time, remember to tap subscribe and the bell so you never miss a recap. Until next time, take care.